All right, there's a stream. I'm going to post it really quick.
Okay. Are you going to put it on Twitter?
Yeah.
I'll retweet that.
As soon as I figure out how to do that. See, I did this with Matt the other day, and he's so good at this. I'm still a boomer.
Me too. Like I can't, if it's a brand new thing, I don't know. I've never done any of the web-based stuff. It's so cool that they've got all these now.
Yeah, this is really cool. All right. Well, I don't know how to do that. Sorry, man.
Is it on YouTube?
It should be. Oh, yeah. Yes.
You should be able to just like copy and paste. Yeah.
Let me double check that. Yes.
There you go.
Boom.
Cool.
Just tweeted it.
Oh, I see it too. I'm going to tweet it too. There we go. Sweet.
All right, cool. You guys, who's out there? I see some people already here. Feel free to comment so I can see that that's happening. All right, we'll just jump into it.
Cool.
All right, Vin, Armani, all the way from Saipan. Yes, we got some comments already. It's working. The Counterflow live stream on YouTube. Thanks for being here, Vin.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Buck.
Yeah, Thursday morning in Saipan.
Indeed, yeah.
I need to ask you how Wednesday night was for me. You've already seen it.
Restful.
Good. You said the other day, I hope I can ask you this. You said it in my DM that there was a Russian priest out there with you guys. What was that? That's intriguing to me at this point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
What was that?
Intriguing to us also. He, the broader context is that, so my spiritual father, who's a Serbian Orthodox priest and a reader from that parish who I have gotten to know over this time, who's my godfather and who has been training me up in the faith, preceding and then after my baptism, which they came here to do, and then sanctify my marriage, and then obviously do services. My wife is Russian Orthodox, and so she's already in the church. My kids are already baptized. And actually the baptism of my oldest daughter was the first time I had ever been in an Orthodox church. Wow. And so, but there was no like thing for like Orthodoxy found me like not via her, which is interesting that it came completely independent, but then lo and behold, like, oh yeah, this is the right thing. But I had no idea I had been like with this Orthodox woman all these years. My kids are already Orthodox. So talk about an easy transition, right? So, so that was like beginning of, it was beginning of this month, was it?
Yeah.
So they were beginning of June. My spiritual father came out here.
Okay.
And then they left. They stayed for about a week, a little under a week, and then left. And then we were just out on the beach on July 4th, family and I, and some of the guys who are here, who are part of the community here. And it's evening time. I just walk out with my daughter to go for one last swim, and then I look back. And like sitting in the chair that I had just left is like, I seriously thought it was like Terrence McKenna in a Cossack, because this dude who was like dead on looking like Terrence McKenna, but like a priest in a black Cossack with a giant, silver pectoral cross. And it was like, what? Because there's no Orthodox church here. There's no priest here. And so went and sat down, and yeah, lo and behold, 3 weeks after I'm accepted into the church, there's a Russian Orthodox priest on the island who is from, he has a parish in Taiwan, but decided to go on a mission. It's in the Orthodox Church, the calendar's different. It's the old calendar. It's the Julian calendar and not the Gregorian. And it was the apostles, the fast of the apostles. It's all about the apostles going out and spreading the gospel. And so he is a mission priest. That's what he does. And so he was like, I'm going to places where he had been to Papua New Guinea and these other places. And he's like, I looked at the church records. No Russian priest has been in the Marianas for like over 200 years, since the 1800s. And he was like, I heard that there were some Russians here. I heard that there might've been a mission back in the day. And so he just got his stuff together and he just came. And then there he was. And so he just left yesterday. And while he was here, he did some catechism classes. He did lots of services, stuck around and spoke a lot. The Russian community here, it was great for them. My spiritual father's an American, even though he's in the Serbian Orthodox Church. So like for my wife and her friends within the Russian community, it was just like such a huge difference. Like it was one thing for them to have an Orthodox priest out here. That was nice, but it was a totally different thing for them to sit with. And not just any priest, but like a really interesting one, who's like, his role is kind of like an ambassador. He answers directly to the patriarch. So he just had some very interesting views on things. Highly, highly educated, has a PhD. And it was just a wonderful experience, honestly. And what a blessing, and how providential that the timing worked out the way that it did. So it was just, it was pretty amazing. He just left. So it was pretty awesome.
What's the biggest difference? And I, pardon my ignorance, I'm just now kind of discovering some of the Orthodox Christianity stuff. There's a podcast called Lord of Spirits that I've been checking out. What's the biggest obvious difference between Orthodox Christianity and other forms of Christianity, other denominations?
Whoa, that's like a gigantic theological question. I could tell you what it is for me, what the difference is for me, right? I think that any Orthodox person, and certainly an Orthodox priest, is gonna think that there's a big difference. If you want to know, there's a very short book by an American, and it's probably good for like Western and American audiences. It's a very short book. It's actually a transcription of a speech, a talk and question and answer period from Father Seraphim Rose, who's like he's like one of the best known modern Orthodox priests. And it's called God's Revelation to the Human Heart. And that's basically the question. He gave it during a symposium. I believe maybe it was at Berkeley. It's at a Northern California college during, let's say, the early 80s.
Okay.
And so he's among a group so there's, I think, a Catholic priest that's there. There's like some like Hindu types. There's some Buddhists, whatever. Father Seraphim Rose studied with Alan Watts. So people watching this are probably familiar with Alan Watts, sort of the most famous evangelist of Zen Buddhism to the United States. So he sort of brought that in. You could find his stuff all over YouTube. It's shared all the time. People in sort of the New Age movement and stuff are big on him. So Seraphim Rose had studied with him before he was Father Seraphim Rose, and then found orthodoxy. So he discusses it, and I think that for me, it's the mysticism.
Okay.
And what I mean by mysticism is orthodoxy, and it's an ancient form of Christianity. It's the ancient form of Christianity. And so it's about an experience. And the goal of orthodoxy, or what is trying to be achieved, or what orthodoxy is delivering, what the church is delivering, is an experience of the Holy Spirit to the members of the church. And so it is not, for people who are very materialistic, this is very hard for them to wrap their heads around, because it is really like a complete shift of what reality is, which if you're checking out Lord of the Spirits, you're probably like starting to get that idea. But I think one of the things, if you're just listening to the podcast, you're like, oh, this is very interesting. And like, or if you listen to Jonathan Pajot, you're like, oh, this is very interesting. It's like symbolism and metaphors, but when you're practicing orthodoxy and you start to get it, you start to realize, like, and Jonathan Pageau says this all the time, that it becomes very real that, like, oh no, this is the actual structure of reality. It's not this view, this mechanistic materialist view that we are sort of brought up in the soup of in the West, that it is like, no, it is this mystical experience. It is this mystery. There are these spirits working in the world. This is how it's actually occurring. Like, the things that are occurring in humanity and in society and all of these things, like, oh no, the real description we've had for a very, very long time, and we fell away from it. And so that's really, orthodoxy is a complete shift in worldview, but to call it a shift in worldview is not adequate. It's like a shift in the entire fabric of reality. Mm-hmm. And things that didn't make sense make sense. Things where, like, you know, sociologists or whatever will debate and try to argue about, like, why are people doing this and this and this and this, and like the psychological and all of this. All of that makes sense, and it's much simpler. You're like, oh, okay. And then also at the same time is this idea that, like, even that description, let's say the mystical description, you just accept that it's like, well, this is the best description you can have, and that if you utilize this, if you view the world utilizing this description, you can move through the world, right? But that you're never going to get this, like, base answer, which is the scientism and all of this. And we've seen this during the last year and a half, right? Is that people are like, and I think that this is one of the reasons why like this experience with the pandemic and all of that, pandemic has led a lot of people to the mystical, mm-hmm. because they're like, wait a minute, none of these charts and figures and, like, the materialist truth doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't alter reality. And then when history is written, all of these studies that were done and all of that, they're going to be scrubbed. They're going to be memory hold. Nobody will even remember them. And what history will say is that it happened in this mystical way that the Church of Woke is pushing. And so you start to realize that, like, oh no, if I'm going to survive, if I'm going to thrive, I had better start operating under the worldview that these wokes have already adopted. They've already adopted a mystical worldview, where there's no such thing as gender, where men can get pregnant. They're about to do a pregnant man emoji. They live in a world where men can get pregnant, and they're running the show. And you think that you're going to have success in that world if you're like, men can't get pregnant. Look, you need to look at biology and blah, blah, blah. And they're just like, nope, men can be pregnant, canceled.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to understand that, like, that's actually the default. That's how human beings behaved all the way up until, like, 200 years ago. What we experience now and what these people arguing with their charts and graphs, you're a blip. You're the aberration. The new atheists and all those type of people, they're a blip on the radar that's about to be wiped out of history, that no one will care about in 200 years, right? And so it's like, but the mystical has been traveling along, and there's been a mystical battle this whole time. And so I think that that's what people are starting to realize, and orthodoxy is the ancient faith. It's practicing what original Christians were practicing, and it's holding on to that and not changing it. And so I think that that's the reason why so many people are trying to go and find that tradition, because it's all that's left. It's all that's left for people to try to deal with the mystical in a way that's positive and not become one of the woke.
Yeah, so you kind of answered. I was going to ask. It does seem that there's a bit of a swelling in the popularity or increasing popularity of Orthodox Christianity. Have you noticed that?
Well, it's probably, we're seeing it amongst our group.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a bit of a confirmation bias there. It's interesting because, and I was speaking with a guy who's here. He was talking about Roosh. This guy Roosh. I don't really follow Roosh, but I'm aware of him because I was even aware of him at the time when we were both sort of in the pickup artist community. And, you know, people would bring him up from time to time. I know that he's been popular amongst sort of young men and maybe those who lean a little more on the right. And it's interesting because I guess he just recently wrote something and had said, it was sort of tongue in cheek, and then he corrected and clarified that, like, it's called the rise of the orthosphere, I think is this blog. And he had said, orthodoxy is like, it's going viral. And then he clarifies what he means. And he's like, well, not actually. It's not like the church has ever gone away or anything like that. But for me, again, it came in this very sort of genuine way towards me. I wasn't seeking it. I wasn't looking to be involved in a church or anything like that. I was pursuing a practice. I was in the middle of writing a book that became Render Unto Caesar. So I was digging deep into sort of my own spirituality, and it just very much flowed. I met a series of people. I was given some stuff. I was like, is this prayer? And then I was, trying to move further, and my spiritual father, boom, was like, it's almost like presented to me, like, here he is. And he's just the perfect person for me. Like, there couldn't have been a more perfect, like, Orthodox priest that could be presented to me. And so, I think that what's happening is that people who are of a certain mindset and who are looking for answers right now are abandoning. I think it's more about noise being pushed away, the people who are honest. And I think we're seeing this in our own community. I've seen some of the things that you're doing, some of the things you're interested in, these sort of post-libertarian guys, that what's really happening is, like, the things that don't work, this last year and a half has really showed us and exposed to us, revealed, it's been an apocalypse. The veil has been lifted.
Yes.
And a lot of the veil, which is what apocalypse means, apocalypsis, the lifting of the veil, revelation, right? So what the veil was theory and hypothesis about how do we move from point A to point B. In sort of my own world, it was like, how do we get to liberty in our lifetime? Mm-hmm. I went and I lived in New Hampshire, and the opinions on that, one of the reasons the Free State Project can't get anything done is because the opinions on that question, the answer to that question, is so diverse.
Right.
And there was no means, there was no crucible, no means by which we could see, well, what of this is wood and what of this is steel, right? And in order for that to happen, you need to heat it. You need to put it in the fire. There was no fire. And so really what happened was this last year and a half, 2 years has been a fire. And it has burned away all of the things that, painfully as well. And people have not enjoyed me pointing out when some of these things burn away, right? But for those of us who have been honest, and that's why it's not surprising to me that the pickup artist community, in particular, that's what Roosh is talking about, that these group of guys who are sort of following him within the seduction community, it's not surprising to me that they would be turning to orthodoxy and traditional Catholicism, which is now going to have some problems because the Pope is like put the kibosh on the Latin Mass, right? So it's not surprising to me because in order to be good at that, in order to be good at seduction, you have to have a high level of humility and a high level of introspection. And you have to be willing to burn away the dead wood. Most of it is burning away the dead wood. Most of becoming a man of value, the type of guy who can walk into a room and women are like, oh, most of what they're going about is your lack of dead wood. And what they call that is confidence, right? That you walk into a room and there's no pretense, there's no nothing. It's like, oh, this is who this person is. Even if you're an asshole, right? You'll see that the people who are high value people, if they're crazy, they call them eccentric, right? If you're an asshole, they might just call you firm. He's firm but fair. Yeah. Right? And so it's the genuineness. And what is the genuineness? It's the burning away. And so I think that what we see right now, what we're seeing and why we're seeing this rise of the traditional and why we're seeing people say things like libertarian is Christianity without Christ. Yeah. Right? Is that we're in the process of the crucible and burning away the dead wood. And that what's at the core is what people are going to latch onto, the people who are honest. The dead enders will hold on and be burned and ground under the wheel. That's going to happen by nature. Right? But the people who witnessed it, like, oh yes, here's the fire. What can I stand on? Where's the foundation? And what of the rest is just wood that is about to either be burned, or if I step over onto it, it's already ash and I'll just crumble down with it.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening. It's not that. And that's what I responded to my friend. I said, well, that's one of the, he said, oh, you just said it's going viral. He didn't tell me the rest. And I was like, that's one of the dumbest, because I don't really follow Rouge. I was like, that's one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard, that like Christianity is going viral in the year 2021 in the West. It's like, no, the entire thing is built on Christianity. It's like, that's like saying water's going viral, guys. Water's going viral. It's like, no, the whole thing's, water's in everything, right? Carbon's going viral, guys. It's like, no. So it's just that the wood is being burnt away, and then what's left for people to stand on is what was always there the whole time, but it was just obscured by the veil.
Yeah, with the post-libertarian stuff, there is a group of us, and some of us are calling it Praxis is the group now, and we're just we had some things presented to us, all of us did in 2020, and we're left going, wait a second, okay. We've had this theory for a long time. We're all steeped in it. We are well versed in it. But it appears when you look around that it's not very popular, because the cops didn't really have to enforce lockdowns.
Not at all.
The people were very willing to be arms of the government themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts to look like, well, it turns out that society's not full of ANCAPs, much to our dismay. So the question is now, how do we get to where we want to get to? Because if 2020 didn't change your mind and present you with new information, then you are going to get ground up under that wheel, like you mentioned. And so we're just going through, we're brainstorming. There's, Matt is talking about a lot of the Orthodox Christianity stuff, and everyone's just willing to research some more things. And within that now, much like you did, we have received pushback. And one of the things I noticed is I've always enjoyed Tom Woods has a phrase, burning the 3x5 index card of allowable opinion. And I started looking around going, well, a lot of ANCAPs have a 3x5 card of allowable opinion. And the second one of us jumps off and questions something, it's like, oh my God, you have no principles anymore. What are you doing? You think you know more than Rothbard and this kind of stuff. I know I've seen it on Twitter that you have had similar style attacks for kind of different subjects, of course, but I assume you've seen some of that as well.
Yeah, well, it's to be expected. I think that there's something interesting, where you said there that we're realizing that the world, it doesn't consist of a bunch of ANCAPs. What's interesting about that realization is that with a little bit of introspection, you can see that actually it's a presupposition of the entire ANCAP movement, and certainly the people who have those 3x5 cards, is that the world is not made up of all these ANCAPs. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying read Rothbard.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying read Hoppe. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying read Mises. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying we need X person to go out and get onto the biggest platforms to wake people up. Because that's really what it is that it's like sleeping are not like us, awake are like us. And what we're really talking about is we're talking about some process of, let's say, education. We don't want to use the term education, but it really is. This waking up is indoctrination. That's what it is. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so if everybody was like us, we wouldn't need to be if everybody was an ANCAP, we wouldn't need to indoctrinate them. This is why I think the waking up meme is not helpful, because it's not a good description of what needs to happen. We often will say, oh, I was woken up. And if I really look back at that process for me, that was a long process. I can definitely say that there were moments of what we would call a state break, where I'm going along, and then like Ron Paul was a state break moment for a lot of people. And he keeps coming up. His name keeps coming up, but people aren't analyzing what happened, like what was going on. Why did the state break? And what people need to understand is that it wasn't the information that he was saying. That's what's being lost for a lot of people. It was that there was a guy who was a congressman who most of the people watching him were unaware of, but he's a congressman, so he's bona fide. And he's on a Republican stage on national TV, so he's, again, bona fide. Somebody who has been cleared all the way through to be allowed to speak, right? So he's been cleared by the establishment to be allowed to speak. And then he says some things that people had never heard that broke their brains, where they were like, wait, is this establishment thought too? And that's really the big key. And you'll notice that a lot of people in our sort of milieu will do that. We will run to a Thomas Sowell. People will run to, depending on who they are, a Milton Friedman about some certain things, or his son, right? Why are we doing that? Right? Why are we running to those individuals? Why does Thomas Sowell matter? Well, Thomas Sowell matters because Hoover Institute, right? At Stanford. So it's like he is within the boundary of acceptable establishment thought. And this is where Ron Paul was. Ron Paul was not an outsider. He was an insider, but he was right on the edge, straddling the edge back and forth. And those are the people that we call innovators, right? Those are the people those are the Pied Pipers who can come in. You have to come into Hamlin and pull somebody out, right? So this is the key that people need to look at in terms of like, where is the, like, how can we create a state break? What is the thing to create a state break now? It's not about whatever information there is, right? And I think that's the thing that you guys are looking for, that we're all looking for. Certainly that I believe that I've found for me, because that's transformation. If we can, it's like, then you'll transform yourself. So many of us, it's like the idea of this waking up. What's underneath there is that, like, once you wake them up, they're awake, and then they're like self-motivated. That's what happened with so many of us when you talk to people about Ron Paul waking them up. What's the experience of that? I watch Ron Paul. He says something about the Fed. I'm like, what the heck is that? I start researching on my own, and then down the rabbit hole I go. There's a momentum on its own. Ron Paul didn't need to lead me. He didn't need to stick around. He didn't need to do anything like that. He needed to state break me. And that's transformation. And I think that this is what people will find. This is the technology that is the basis of the original. This is the basis of Christianity. This is what Christianity does. This is what the rituals do. This is what baptism originally was. It's a state break, right? This is John the Baptist baptizes Christ in the gospel. The Holy Spirit comes. That's it. The Holy Spirit comes down. Boom. He's on his own. He's motivated internally now by the Holy Spirit, right? And so the ancients, we've known how to do this. We've known how to transform people and have them have a state break. This is known. And it's also something that those of us who became very, very good in seduction and in pickup artistry, which is why Roosh makes perfect sense to me, we understand how to do a state break. We understand how to do a transformation. We understand how to walk into a situation where this woman may be even pushing us away and really believes that she wants nothing to do with us, and state break to the point whereby at the end of the night, she has been transformed into someone who has fallen madly in love with us. This is a technology. This can happen with human beings. And we saw it happen. We saw the wokes do it in the last year and a half, right? And they did it with magic. They did it with ritual, right? They did it, and they transformed people. And now they have physically transformed them with genetic therapy. right? So they got people to get to the point where they would actually allow physical transformation of the machinery of their cells. And so we're in a time of transformation. What we can only, it's mystical. There's only a mystical answer to this. Like, there is no materialist answer. And while I love the fact that people are exploring, I very, very much love that people are exploring and are questioning some of the beliefs that we had held, I think, as a community, and the things that you guys are doing. I think that calling it praxis is very important, because it is about practice. And then it's also, the thing that was missing from the theory was that you could not test it and throw it away if it didn't work. You could not test it and throw it. We were not actively testing it and throwing it out if it didn't work. And so if you proceed forward, it's just like, test it and throw it out if it doesn't work. Because if you do that, you're going to end up in orthodoxy. I can just tell you that right now. You will all end up orthodox if you do it genuinely.
Do you believe in the cyclical model of history?
So history, well, obviously the human experience moves. There are patterns to human experience, right? So, well, there must be. Well, phenomenologically, we live in a world of cyclical patterns, days, seasons, years. This is just reality. But also further, patterns of even through generations. So what I often say to people is an important thing to understand when you're looking at, like, people, like, why would cycles of history be a thing? Why would cycles be a thing? It's not necessarily cycles as much as it is. I mean, I guess you could appreciate it as a cycle, but maybe what's more helpful is something like this. It doesn't matter that I would be a world-class public speaker, which I'm not, but that I would be a world-class public speaker or an Olympic caliber athlete, which I'm not, right? But even if I was, my child would still have to, me being the greatest speaker in the world and the greatest runner doesn't make my child be able to learn to speak faster or run any better out of the womb. That's going to have to be learned by that child, and their child will be the same, and their child will be the same. And this is like at the individual level. But then writ large, it's like we have to keep relearning the lessons. We don't come out of the womb wise. We have to keep learning. And it's been interesting for me as I'm, in my 40s now, and now I'm spending time, and I've mentioned this to people before, I'm spending time around these guys in their 20s who have come here, to Saipan and whatnot. And there's been this, both implicit in ways and explicit in ways, this sort of mentor-apprentice relationship. And, they'll ask me my opinion on something. Oh, should I be doing this? And I'll say, don't do that. That's it. And then they'll just be like, no, but I think, and then they'll argue with me. I'm like, okay, go and do it. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I get a smile and say go and do it is because my mentors, I did the exact same thing with my mentors. They gave me the exact same advice, and I said the exact same thing back to them. And they said the advice to me with the smile. Okay, go try it. And so this is like writ large. We have to keep coming back and relearning these lessons. And so it looks like a cycle, but what it really is it's like a single story, whether that's the hero's journey, the monomyth, whatever you want to call it, but it's contained in the tradition as well. So it's like, that's another aspect of orthodoxy, that it's all about the tradition. An Orthodox priest will much more tell you, read the lives of saints rather than read the Gospels.
Right.
Because it's like, what you're trying to get at is, over the last 2,000 years, the story is the same of all these people. It's just like, there's little alterations, right? It's the difference between Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, but they're the same story. When you really break down the elements, they're the same narrative, And so that's really what it is. It's not that it cycles. It's that there's oops. Uh-oh. What's happening? Am I back? Uh-oh. I think I lost you. Hold on one second. I can't hear you. Uh-oh. Oh well. It looks like I've lost sound on you. I'm gonna leave and rejoin. Oh, you want me to leave and rejoin? Can you hear me? Cannot hear me. Okay, I'm gonna leave and rejoin.
Hey guys, it's just me. All right. Check one. I bet you hear me now. Yes, thank you. It's just this technology. It's pretty good, but it's not amazing.
Oh,
I
there
think
we
you
go.
got. How about that?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Okay, I'm back. I'm back. So yeah,
Good.
it is. So what I was saying is it isn't that it's cyclical, but it is that it is it's better to think of it more as a story, right? And that the story keeps being told over and over and over again. Because I think the cycle thing, it is an accurate way of looking at it, but I think it's less important that there is a cycle and more important that we get the story right. Like the order of the story is much more important rather than just the idea that, well, there's a cycle and let's put something in there, right?
Okay.
It's more important that what the story is and how the narrative goes.
Well, when I wrote you to get you on this, now I guess it's been about 2 weeks ago. Um, I said we'll talk about X, Y, Z, and give you a list, and then you put this amazing video out like a few
Okay.
days later, and I was like, well, that's some of the stuff I wanted to talk about, but your video was so well done. Can we talk about the apology and the arc some? It starts off really heartfelt, and well, it's all heartfelt, but it starts out, and I'm going, wow, this is really cool. And at the end, I'm like, Vin is scaring me, but he's probably very right. This sounds pretty accurate. Um, what what intrigued you to put the video out to start with?
Um. Well, I think there was, there was this controversy, and there was like a pro. What I saw was was proactively, let's say, a group of individuals who had, let's say, taken it upon themselves to not just engage with me negatively. I would use the term attack, but let's say engage with me in a negative way, or attempt to what would I say? Attempt to disrupt sort of the ongoing conversation that I was having publicly. So attempt to disrupt my public communication about anything after this thing happened, right? And that was interesting to me because it was something that it went beyond, like, let's just say, haters, right? So I've experienced haters. I'm I have a background where my public persona was much bigger, and in that background, haters are just a thing, and you're just like, okay, haters. This was different. This had a different tenor to it. This had a really malicious sort of feel to it, a very dark feeling to it. And
It was very much what I could see from these individuals was very much this idea that like this guy is an enemy. He's an enemy. He's done something to me, right? Like, and it was foreign to me because I generally don't conduct myself that way, right? I rarely will say something about individuals unless I really see that someone is that what someone is doing is either pathological or is, even if they're unconsciously doing it, that I'm like, it's gonna really lead to a bad situation, right? And what I saw was that I had I had used language in a public forum being seen by people who maybe didn't have experience of me or hadn't spent any time with my books, my videos, my public persona, my Twitter, watched interviews that like those that I've done with you, etc. And so I use terms that I think people who had more and I got this feedback as well, that people who have had experience with the way that I speak and the way that I frame arguments and maybe some metaphors that I use or some symbols that I use, they were like, oh no, I got it. I got what you were saying. But even they were like, but if I didn't know you, yeah, I would have taken this a whole other way.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's super fair. That's super fair. Like going back and thinking about it, and it's like, okay, yeah, I did not, that was inconsiderate on my part. It's inconsiderate to people who aren't familiar with me. Like I should have taken more time. I should have taken more time to either frame this response or to at that time have been like, okay, right now I can't particularly talk about this. Let's talk about the things that I can talk about that I can talk about that everybody will understand. Because what was lost was the entire message I was trying to get across in that conversation, right? Like that became completely lost. And I was like, well, then that conversation was completely counterproductive. Like all I did was introduce drama and conflict, which is like, who does that benefit? And so, so yeah, it was just one of those situations where I was like, I genuinely, if that's if that's what I do, if I go and I like, because then I'm just being a hater, right?
Yeah.
Like if that's all that somebody pulls out of it is I'm just being a hater. And having had thousands, right, of people who don't know anything about me coming and hating on me, like, and even people in high places, you know, I know how that feels. And so if I created a situation where I left somebody feeling that way, whether it was my intention or not, which it surely wasn't my intention, then obviously they're owed an apology. And then, you know, I was glad to, you know, then hopefully what was at the end of that was the message I was trying to get across. You know, having thought about it, that was the message I was trying to get across in the first place. So if it was able to get across then you know, mission accomplished. And I'll just say that it was like rough draft and final draft.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, the initial rough draft, I suppose was quite shocking, you know, and I understand where you're coming from, and I've heard you speak a lot, and I've spoken to you, so I fall into that camp where I was like, I get what he's saying, but I see where that came off a little rough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just out of curiosity, what are any of the critiques that were more from honest actors that you heard and you thought, okay, fair enough, that's a fair point, versus kind of just the craziness?
I mean, the biggest critique was about my word choice.
Okay.
Right. And that was, and I mean, that there was no, I mean, even people who, even Matt brought that up, right? Like even Matt was like, yeah, I wouldn't have used those words that he used, you know? And then, but at the same time, it's like, I shouldn't have to have individuals like justifying and clarifying my words. Like I'm better than that. I know that I'm better than that, right? Like I've worked hard at that throughout my life to be able to communicate in that way, in clear ways. And so, you know, that was a big criticism. And then the other one, which I addressed, and I'm still trying to like fully wrap my head around because I think it's valid, but I'm not really quite sure how to address it. And that's something like, you know, you're saying don't do this, or you're saying this is coming, or this is bad, or you're warning about something, but you're not giving me something to do about it, right?
Yeah.
You're leaving me floundering here. But yet you're sort of insinuating that you know. And I'm not insinuating that I know. I'm saying that, like, I've got a path that makes me feel secure that what is going to happen through this, that at least I have the right orientation. And so I think that more what I'm seeing, and it goes sort of back to the beginning of this conversation, is that, you know, it's not really concrete things that people need at this point. What people really, really need is an orientation change. And that's the Ron Paul state break, right? Then they'll have the momentum all on their own. And so it's like, what people really need is they need to know, where do I look so that I can just keep moving forward and move to a better place, right? They just need the compass to say, turn left, right? Stay looking at this thing and, like, go straight now. They need that bit of GPS just to tell them which direction to face in. And for me, that facing has been, through all of this, I have been facing at Christ as expressed in the practice of orthodoxy. And it was just that, like, I was facing in that direction, and then of course I found orthodoxy here as I kept moving forward, right? But it wasn't like, oh, here's orthodoxy, then teach me all this stuff. It was like, oh, here's orthodoxy telling me explaining to me the phenomena that I'm already experiencing, and saying, like, oh yeah, that's how reality works. Like, and here's an even bigger explanation. And it's very much like the rabbit hole, right? The Ron Paul state break, and then I travel down the rabbit hole. And what you learn down the rabbit hole is not something different than what Ron Paul said, but it's an expansion, right? And then you find your own place in there. And so we had been pointed at the end, really we've been pointed at so it's the eschaton, the end thing. We had been pointed, the eschaton for many people was Ancapistan. And if we're honest, what Ancapistan is it's really the eschaton of the Enlightenment. We call it Ancapistan, but it is really the end thing, the promised land of the Enlightenment. So if you go back and you look at all of Enlightenment thought, Ancapistan is the mental manifestation of, if you follow the Enlightenment and you follow the principles there, that's the orientation that will eventually lead you to this promised land, this utopia of individual sovereignty and freedom. And it just turns out that that's a dead end. The Enlightenment is ending. And so if people want to survive and thrive, you need to turn your orientation. And if you will turn your orientation to really what the Enlightenment had slightly pulled everybody off from in the first place, necessarily, right? So it's about learning. Then if you will point it back at what it's supposed to be pointed at, then we can continue to move forward on the project.
Let's get to towards the end of that apology video in the arc.
Sure.
Are you cool with talking about some of the stuff you do see coming? Because that was it's interesting, and this is almost common now to discuss. But I got into a lot of this stuff from Alex Jones, because in Austin, Texas, I was here in 1998, and he was on the FM. A year or two later, he was on the FM radio dial. I can't believe, looking back, that they allowed him to have an FM talk radio show that was fairly mainstream. And I would hear him say these things that we've all heard now, and it really intrigued me, and it got me into Ron Paul, et cetera, et cetera. And now, of course, he's becoming bigger than ever. And I hear people, normal, sane people, not that he wasn't that, but for a long time, he represented something way out here for me. And then everyone else was over here. Now the circles are expanding so wide that they're touching what he was saying. And I listened to the end of your video that we're talking about, and I was like, man, this is crazy that this is coming across now to me so normal.
Mhm.
And a long time ago, I just thought this Alex Jones guy might be right, but it's a little crazy too. Um, so I wanted to lead it into to this discussion part of it with that. Talk about what you discussed at the end of that video and what you do see coming.
That is what you just said is a very important point. And I want to take it back even further because this is a conversation that we had night before last, the last night that this priest was here with the guys. Sort of the Russian women and the kids had gone home, and it's rather late, and we're sitting outside on my patio with the priest, and we're drinking some tea, and maybe 5 guys there and this priest, and we're talking about these things because and then we started talking about the book of Revelation and the mark of the beast. And you look at St. John the theologian, and there's only 3 people in the history of the church who have been called a theologian, right? And so St. John, who's the Gospels and then Revelation, is one of them. And you look at this idea of the mark of the beast. No one will be able to buy or sell unless they've got this mark, right, in their hands or on their forehead. And you go back to when he wrote that, and you imagine someone reading this and even trying to fathom how such a thing could be possible. They'd be like, well, what are you talking about? Like, who's going to put the mark? How could they prevent me? Like, if I've got gold in my pocket, I go to this guy. Like, who would even see it? Who would know? How would this happen? It takes on a view that must be supernatural, hyper spiritual, very mystical. Even in my childhood, when people would bring this up when I was in church, it would be like, well, how would this happen? They're like, oh, well, there'll be like, and it gets into like magic talk. Gets into magic talk.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But now we've got CBDCs coming. China actually has a system where this, with the central bank digital currency, where this is actually a reality today in China, in their tester cities. So they have these giant cities that they just build out of nowhere. And in several of these tester cities, the only currency that you can use is China's central bank digital currency, which they can expire it, they can do all of that, and you have to have it on your phone. And in order to move around, and it's a QR code. And look what I'm doing.
Yes, right.
The mark.
Yeah.
The mark in your hand. Right? And it's like, no, that's real. That's real. It's real now. And then you go back and you read Revelation, you're like, oh no, St. John the theologian is saying something that's real. That's really, it's like he's having a vision, but he's saying something that actually came to pass, that we are in now. And so this is the thing with Alex Jones, is that, and this is why when I say it's not about cycles, it's about the story. How does the story happen? And what happened was John received from the Holy Spirit, and this is why when I say it's about an experience, this is the difference in the Orthodox worldview. The Orthodox worldview says, no. There is a story. And then there are entities, forces that are beyond time that can deliver that story to you. You may not understand it at the time, whatever. Holy individuals will have the story, and then they'll tell you the story as best they can. They'll put it into words as best they can. But this is the story. And this is the story at the end, when all is revealed, right? When the wood is burned away. When all is revealed, this is what the story will look like. And so Alex Jones is an individual who is an inspired individual. For whatever reason, and there's not a, because he predicted 9/11 too.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, Alex Jones has proven time and time again that he's tuned in to the story. And so he says some things that seem crazy, right? And people have said the same thing about me. And then it happens. But all it is I'm tuned into the story. That's all. That's all. And people will notice that when I speak publicly, that's what I always say. I say, well, the next part of the story is this. The next part of the story is this. And you look around the world and you say, well, what sort of looks like this next part of the story? Oh, well, that's got a thing. And that's what Alex Jones is doing. That's basically what he's doing. He knows the story. He's pointed at the eschaton, right? And then he's like, well, what would be the next thing on the path? And he can see the things that are already out there, and he just knows we're going to reach that, right? And so it's like, but this is an ongoing pattern, an ongoing thing that has happened. And so the things that I talked about at the end of that video, which is like, these are the eschaton things, is really, it's very, very simple. And it's the panopticon. That's what's coming. The panopticon. But it's a choice. It's a choice. And this is always the story. From 1984 to things that Alex Jones will say, all of this. The people who are inside of it are going to make a choice to be inside of it. And the first generation, it's not going to be a big deal. And the second generation, it's not also going to be a big deal. Perhaps. But around the third generation, you're going to start to get the Winstons of the group, right? Those who have read 1984. You're going to start to get the Winstons. You're going to start to get the people who are like, I didn't agree to this. The same ANCAP idea, right? A social contract, I didn't sign it. Yeah, but you know, men did actually sign the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. To them, it wasn't a problem. To them, it was voluntary. They decided it. But what's going to happen is that, so your grandchildren, if you're a relatively young person now, or if you've got young children now, your grandchildren, if you don't do something to build the ark, your grandchildren, so that they can be in it, your future generations, your grandchildren are going to be in a society where they will simply have no access to information that life had ever been different than it is in terms of whatever freedoms they have. And they will have no means of even acquiring that information because they will have no means of exchanging value with the individuals who have it. This is the very, very key and subtle thing that people don't realize about why the financial aspect is important. Mm-hmm. The financial aspect is important because you have to pay for your freedom. If you can't earn money, you can't pay for your freedom. Slaves could buy their freedom. Even in U.S. slavery, slaves could buy their freedom. Slaves were for sale. Some slaves did buy their freedom. Those were few and far between. Why? Because if you're a slave, you can't earn any money. You have no means. And the people outside of the system who are free won't take your company script. They won't take your CBDC because they'll be on a different system. That's a free system. But you will have an inability to earn that. And so this is what the arc is about, is that it's like, this is the last chance. The materials, the wood to build the ark, the pitch, it's here now. It's not going to be here in a generation. The information that you will need is not going to be accessible to you. Look to China. What's happening in China is coming, and some of the young guys here are like, well, but timelines. And I'm like, dude, and they're 20, right? So it's like, bro, I remember marching in the streets for anti-war protests in 2003. Mm-hmm. Right? That seems like yesterday. And if people don't understand, these are guys who have lived their whole entire life after 9/11. They don't even understand the freedoms that were lost. And it's like, dude, that was nothing. I was your age, just a little younger than you. It's going to be in a lifetime. If you look back when you're 40 and you're living in China, but it's a frog in a pot. It's a frog in a pot. And you don't know when it's going to be. Where's James Corbett's YouTube channel?
Right.
Right? You don't know when it's going to be gone. You don't know. And so it's like, that's what I'm trying to communicate. And I'm not trying to scare people, because It's just, I'm trying to get people to make a choice. Either make a choice. Make a choice of, are you going to be, most people will just be in the system. Most people would just be in the system. And the people that decide that they're not going to be in the system, I'm not going to lie to you, it's suffering. You're going to suffer. It's going to suck. Many of the luxuries that you have taken for granted, you're only going to get to keep those if you continue in the system. So it's going to suck. But your grandchildren potentially won't be slaves. Potentially they won't be slaves if you do everything right. Right? And it's just like, being on an ark with your family and 2 of every animal sucks. It sucks. Okay? But that's what you're looking at. And so it's just like, here's the decision to make. Either do or don't. And I'm trying to get people to make a decision. I think people can see it, but they're just in denial. It's like, okay, then you're going to be in the system. And it is what it is. I mean, I'm not making a moral or ethical statement about it. You're going to be in it, but just know that you're not just dooming yourself to it. You're dooming your children and your grandchildren, if you can even have them after you get the next set of gene therapies that are going to be required, right? So,
have you taken on being a mentor out there where you're at? It sounds like you are kind of into it. I mean, it comes with some responsibility for sure. What are your thoughts on mentorship at this point?
Oh, I feel very responsible to the men here, and I tell them that. And yeah, it's not something that I particularly would ever, let's say, like, seek out. It's not something that I'm after. I'm a pretty disagreeable person. I took like that Big 5 personality test, and I'm like the most disagreeable that you could be. And I'm pretty antisocial. I like to be alone a lot. I'm very moody, and people, as people could see, I'm pretty like, gruff in my approach and communication. So it's not everybody that I think I'm probably even a good mentor towards, but yeah, I feel a deep sense of responsibility, but it's also very rewarding to me. And it's rewarding, especially for me, to be able to look back on myself and my own growth and analyze some of my own thought processes and see myself in these guys. So it's a wonderful thing, but but when people are like, you're telling everybody to come to Saipan, I'm like, no, I'm not, because then I'll feel a responsibility for you too. Mm-hmm. So don't come.
So you're talking about there are people that came there specifically to kind of be in your presence, basically?
I don't know if my presence,
not your presence. Yeah,
that we're doing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I've held you a while on here. Now, is there anything you'd like to get off your chest? I'll give you the floor, whatever you want to talk about. Not off your chest, like you've been stressed over the last 3 weeks or anything like that. Just anything, really.
If anything, I do think that it really is about people. If people take anything away, I do really think that it is about this idea of finding an orientation. Like I wrote about it quite a bit in my book, Render Unto Caesar. And it's less about what you need. A lot less of right now is what do I do? And more about, like, where should my attention be? What should I be looking at? Let's say metaphorically, but also literally, what should I be looking at? Because that is going to actually determine so much of what your path ends up being, especially in the times that we're in now, where the algorithms run everything. So we know how that works, right? You start get on YouTube, start deciding that you're going to look at a few videos, and what does it start serving you? Understand that that is the nature of reality. Those algorithms work, and YouTube is popular, incredibly popular, and it holds your attention because it is leveraging the way that human psychology works. And human psychology works that way because it evolved in an environment that works that way. So like this whole believe it and you could achieve it, the law of attraction, these are all like very weak and materialist attempts at getting at this idea of orientation. And I mean the word orient. So like orientation is like you're going to orient yourself, right? Which means you're going to look in a certain direction. Well, orient means east. And so it actually, the etymology is to face east. Well, where do you face east? Well, in an Orthodox church, in a Christian church.
Mm.
So if you're in a Christian church, the people are facing east. The altar is in the east. That's where it comes from. So it comes from the architecture of a church. And so you need to find your orientation. And your orientation, the idea there with orientation is look toward God. Look toward this thing. And that's, if you go in an Orthodox church, that's how a traditional church is set up. A traditional people are standing and they're looking. And the direction that you're facing is very important within the ritual. It's all about facing and looking at something. This is where icons come in, all of these things. Where is your attention? Because the ancients understood, and we have to recapture and understand, where you look is where you go. And look, you don't even have to get mystical. That's YouTube. It's the YouTube algorithm. If you start looking at baseball highlights, guess what your feed is going to be filled with? If you start looking at, botany videos, watch 10 botany videos and watch what shows up in your feed. And so
it's also quite literally where you go. For anyone who rides a motorcycle, do not ever stare at the giant boulder that you're going to pass, because all of a sudden, guess where you go?
This is the structure of reality. It's the structure of reality. So the idea that the ancients are like, well, let's build this ritual space, and what's very important is where we face. Like there's instructions in the liturgy that the priest will now face here. Now the priest will face here. Now the priest will face here. Now that they'll look here. Now you'll look over here. Why? Because where you look is where you go. And ritual works. Ritual works. It's why you're locked down again. Ritual really works on a global. It's been nothing but ritual. They got you to do a ritual, and then you started to believe. They got you to put on masks, and now you've worn masks forever. It's a ritual. And so it's like the way to break out of this is you have to orient yourself. And then you have to ritualize that orientation, that when you get off, you say, oh no, I'm looking back at this. And our entire culture is built on a single orientation. And so it needs to be more than just lip service and being like, oh, it's a Christian culture. It's a Christian culture. And it's like, okay, that's great. That's good for saying that. Do you want to remain in the culture? Do you want the culture to continue? Where are you facing? Are you looking at Christ? If so, like, are you really looking at Christ? Like, really looking at Christ like the people who built the culture were looking at Christ? Because they died instead of worship some other god, right? Being brought in front of a king and the king saying, just simply kneel and put incense on this thing and say that you will worship this God. And time after time after time, they're like, kill me instead. The most brutal way, go ahead, kill me. That's what the civilization is built. So when people are like, it's a Christian civilization, no, that's what it is. It's that level of orientation. Like, I will look there and I will not take my gaze off it even a little bit. I will not deny. Try to find something that you can, and this is why I say that if you're honest about it, and if you're like, no, I'm going to look for an orientation where I can actually say that, you will wind up at orthodoxy. There's no question, because there isn't another one. There isn't another one, right? You'll either wind up at orthodoxy or you'll wind up like basically a Luciferian, right? And that's who's doing these things, right? They're pointed at something too. They're pointed at something too. The people who are giving these genetic modification shots, the people who are, forcing children to wear muzzles in school, the people who are locking people inside of their houses, the people who are destroying economies, they've got their gaze on something too.
What about the ones that we talk about the Church of Woke and the mysticism that they're using, and we've all seen this, of course, but you will hear from many of them, no, this is science. This is science. These masks work. These lockdowns work. We can throw all the facts and charts, et cetera, in their face. Doesn't matter. That's where it obviously seems like it's mystical at that point because the facts really don't matter to them. Um, how do they get away with basically being mystical yet claiming otherwise?
I don't think that they're claiming otherwise.
No,
They're not.
the
They're,
science crowd.
well, there's Christian Scientists. That's a cult. Christian Science. It's a cult, right? There's Scientology.
Mm-hmm.
You can call anything science, and scientia is just knowledge, right? That's all scientia. It's just knowledge, and so there's mysticism is science too. There's they call boxing the sweet science.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a science. It's a science of control, and they've got it down, and it does work. The masks do work. The lockdowns do work. They're getting everything they want. They're getting everything they want. So when they say no, it works, and you're an idiot, it's like they're not lying. They're not lying. It does work, and you're unable to stop them.
We got a question. Let me see if he can ask it. Alfredo, ask your question, sir. And Vin, while he's going to type that question real quick, I had something to get off my chest. One
Please.
of the critiques I saw thrown your way that I thought was so odd coming from libertarians, I saw a lot of people that were not cool with your old profession. Which I thought within libertarian circles, and in some of the libertarian circles, it's celebrated. In others, it's at least tolerated. Yet, boy, did they come after you because of it. Did you see that?
Yeah, but I think that it's just it's a gimme, right? It's like, what else?
Just low hanging fruit.
What else do you have? And it's of all of them, it's the like, it's sort of the weirdest. It's the weirdest one, and I'm not sure what it signals or what it indicates. I think it probably indicates something good, because my life as it is now, when I look back, I'm thankful for. Look, what a unique experience I had.
I bet.
Like
Right.
all around, a completely unique experience. I think the best part about that experience, which was basically about, let's say, about 7 years, was that I got to see what is it like to be, more than anything, what is it like to be a celebrity? What is it like to have A-list friends? What is it like to be, walking around and have people want to take pictures with you? What is it like to have more money than you can spend? What is it, like FU money, right? That you just burn in stupid ways and you don't care, And one of the things that I learned was that it's like, I don't want any of that, right? Like all of these things that people are striving for, I realized, and it really does inform me now. Like, had I not had that experience, I couldn't just so easily just be like, I do not want that.
Okay.
And I would say that I don't, because it's like you have to have it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's like some question of like, oh no, but if you had all this money, it would like solve, and it's like, wow, it solves some things, and celebrity solves some things, but the problems, if you haven't handled yourself, the problems that it introduces are so much worse. They're so much worse, and they're so much heavier, and they take so much longer to get around. And so it's like, it's weird, the aspect of the thing that they're calling out. It seems like, it seems low hanging fruit. But yeah, that was that. I'm interested to know like how. I'm always interested to know how people's minds work. That they would be like that's what they would key on, and sort of what it says about them.
Yeah,
So
me
it'd be
too.
the last thing that I would key on, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
but it's like I mean I guess that's how some people are, and then I think it's just like give them the other thing, give them the positive thing. Um, I think they've probably got a lot of darkness and a lot of nihilism in their world, and it's like that's understandable right now.
Yeah.
And I'm never like upset by those things, but I am endlessly curious about them. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where those people wind up, and uh, it would be wonderful if I was ever able to provide something that would help to bring them from out of wherever the place that they are, and introduce them to something, a different path that they could go down, even if it's just the littlest thing. So it's always good to know. It's always good to keep your edge sharp, as my spiritual father says. It's good to not think that the world is like just wonderful and all of that and live in a bubble. It's good to also know that like, oh, there's some people who've got some dark stuff in their hearts as well, and like those people you shouldn't be ignoring or dismissing those people. Like you should be engaging with those people because they need they need help too.
One of the people in the comment section asked, "What are they referring to exactly when they say 'quote unquote' trust the science'?" I suppose it means who's they, but
That's their God.
yeah.
So it's what I call the prince of this world, and the Christian tradition has always said that the material world, materialism, is the domain of the devil, Satan, Lucifer, whatever you want to, the adversary, the enemy. It's always the material, and the pursuit of the material to the exclusion of the mystical. And so it is also the deception, because the science says that there is no mysticism, right? The science is the trick. The people behind the science know that there's a lot of mysticism. Go talk to a quantum physicist. Go talk to a very high level mathematician. Go talk to a biologist who's really honest and will really talk to you about the mysteries and the things that they don't understand, and who's not fully bought into the materialism. You'll get plenty of mysticism coming from those guys. And so what they're saying when they say trust the science is like, trust that there is nothing mystical about this. Trust that it is completely materialist, while at the same time being completely mystical. Trust, faith. Show make a declaration of faith. And that's what the wokes are doing every time they're like, I'm just following the science. This is their declaration of faith, right? This is like the Nicene Creed, or the Islamic declaration of faith, the profession of the faith.
If you had to choose one libertarian to come out there and live with you in Saipan, who would it be?
No libertarians.
Good answer.
I lived in New Hampshire, man. I don't live there anymore. So, like I said, I'm a disagreeable person. I mean, that's not true. There's tons of people who are libertarians who I enjoy. Which one would I choose? I would choose the one that chose this place,
Okay.
right? So it's like, this place is a gigantic filter. It's a gigantic filter, and so in order to be comfortable to come here, or to want to come here, something's got to be pulling you here. You don't just travel out to the middle of the Pacific Ocean on a tiny little island unless you're drawn by something, right? And so it's like, I wouldn't want somebody to come out here except that they were drawn, and hopefully it wasn't that they were drawn by me, but maybe it could be that they were drawn by sort of following me and seeing that something, that I've had a transformation in being here, and maybe seeking that transformation for themselves.
How do you see the other established religions fitting into this story? Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Sufism.
I mean, I don't know, right? I'm not a theologian. those things exist and they've lasted, so they are a reflection of the patterns. You know, I was raised. My own internal pattern is a Christian milieu. They have different patterns. I don't expect that people who are born in an Islamic country are going to convert to Orthodox Christianity or Judaism or you know, Hinduism, whatever. I think that there's valuable information in all of them. I was in a long-term relationship with a Persian woman, and it was through her that I was introduced to Rumi. And so I think that if you're a mystic, there's probably no world writer who is sort of more visceral and mystical in terms of a personal relationship with God than Rumi, and that's Sufism. So I think that all of those, there are people touched by the divine in all of those. There are people who the Holy Spirit has manifested itself to. How could it not? We're in the world. And so it's just about the language that you speak. And you know, the language that I speak based upon, you know, that the world that I live in and the civilization I inhabit is Christian. I don't know what is for all of those others. They're either going to be shown to be steel, since this is a global thing. They're either going to be shown to be steel or they're going to be shown to be wood. So here comes the crucible, and we'll see which is burned away and which remains.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool, man. I think we can get out of here on that note. And we got to ask some questions and get some feedback and talk with the people in the chat. So thank you guys for watching this. There's one more. So if we can start paying attention to get the ball rolling for building our arcs, is there any additional steps we should look in more?
Well, the question is, what are you paying attention to? And so in my book, what I talk about this concept of the Most High.
Yeah.
And so the Most High is the most preferable thing. And so you got to be on a search for the Most High. And if you're really on that search, it's going to become clear, right? Like, people have been in earnest on this search, and people who are a lot more holy than all of us, like people who are like, I'm going on this search, and to go on this search, I'm going off in the wilderness, and I'm going to live in a cave for the rest of my life and fast and just pray to look to see what is the Most High. And what I will tell you is that when you have your attention on the Most High, the steps are revealed to you. That's the secret. The secret is that then you just are simply, you're guided. This is the story of every mystic. And so it's all about surrender, and it's all about introspection, and say, oh, I want this. You see yourself moving in a direction, and you say, oh, I want this. And you say, is this the most preferable thing for me to want? You know, you look and you say, is that just short term? Is that truly long term? Is that good for me? Then is it good for my family? This is a Jordan Peterson thing. This is like a Petersonian thing that he really broke down well. Like, will this be the best thing that's good for everybody? Stefan Molyneux also wrote about it. If you're looking for some of these things, Peterson wrote about it. Molyneux's book, I was just talking about it as something that really clarified this in my mind. Universally preferable behavior. You just download it, it's free, or download the audiobook. It's short. This concept that it's like, am I preferring something that every single person could prefer from now until eternity? And if every single person preferred it from now till eternity, would everyone's life be better? Genuinely. And like I say, if you're genuinely pursuing it, you're going to wind up in Orthodox Christianity. There's no, you'll see. And it won't take as long. It won't take very long if you do it genuinely and you surrender to, okay, I'm really going to look for the best thing to fix my gaze on. That's where you're going to end up. And so it's like, you don't need next steps. That's the next step, right? Start praying. Even if you don't know how to pray, that's the best. That's the best way to go. Just go genuinely to it and surrender and be like, okay, I'm here looking for the Most High, wanting to communicate. And then some things will come and you'll be like, is what I'm being told, is that the most preferable thing, or does that serve only me? Does that serve everyone? And just listen for the voice, and you'll be taught how to pray as well. Like, that's how it works. That's just how it works. And like, I know for some people they're listening and they're like, what? This is where they get the vague wizard thing. You're just a vague wizard. You're speaking in riddles. And it's like, no, I'm actually not. I'm telling you what the structure of reality is. Like, it's not, it is magic, but it's like, do this for real. Like, you have to put your doubts aside, and don't worry. Who do you have to answer to except yourself? I don't know where you're at. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not asking you to put faith in me. I'm not asking you to join my church or donate or to send your tithes because I need a private jet. I'm not asking you to do any of that. I'm asking you to like wake up before the sun rises, go and just sit and really say like, okay, I'm here praying. How do I pray? Most High, please tell me, what should I be looking at? Like, and just continually do that every day. And watch. Watch the transformation. And like I say, you will end up at Christianity because that's how Christianity got here in the first place.
Excellent. Well put. Thank you guys for asking questions. And Ben, stick around for just a second. We're going to end the stream. Thank you guys. Good night. Have a good one.